This is gonna be a somewhat weird video because we're gonna talk about the character that drained my primogens like a lemon inside the hydraulic press, Kyryll Chudomirovich Flins. We will learn about his past and his true identity, but that's only the tip of the iceberg, because we're also gonna dive deep into the snow of Snezhnaya to try and figure out what has been happening over there since before the Cataclysm even happened. As you can see, there's a lot to talk about. This video ended up being way longer than I anticipated, but first, this is a theory video and leaks are prohibited in the comment section. I will use information available in the game, but my theories and conclusions are not to be considered the official lore of the game, unless I got something right and it's confirmed in a later update of the game itself. Well then, grab your lantern and let's get this video started. To figure out who Flins actually is, we need to go to Snezhnaya before the Cataclysm happened, when the Belgian Tsar still ruled. Back then, Kyryll Chudomirovich Flins, aka Kyryll the Azure Flame, was a Fey noble, a member of the royal court, although he didn't have any followers, so I guess he's always wanted to be on his own. At the core of Snezhnograd, which I believe it's the capital of Snezhnaya, he met a guy, Sokolov, who back then was a complete nobody from southern Snezhnaya. Kyryll intentionally lost a bet with him in order to give him the Tear of the North, a precious gem that formed when the soldiers fought in the northern territories, capable of protecting its bearer. This little story is important because although Sokolov was a nobody, his descendants eventually founded the Adventurers Guild, but also because this explains what kind of blissful, carefree life Kyryll and the Fade used to live under the Belly Tsar. They coexisted with the humans and everything was completely fine. Of course, everything changed with the Cataclysm, when the Belly Tsar died and the Tsaritsa became the new emperor, changing Snezhnaya completely. Unsatisfied and unable to change this new order, Kyryll simply vanished from Snezhnaya and went on a self-imposed exile to the south to find a quiet place where he could await his death without being bothered by anybody. And eventually he found a deserted small island in nod-krai where only a disused lighthouse disrupted the landscape, an eerie place where nobody went to. There he picked a nice stone slate and he carved his own headstone epitaph, which means that when he said,
"You're always welcome to come visit my grave,"
he actually meant it. Literally, this is his grave. Anyway, after building a little altar for himself, he turned into a ball of blue fire and sank into the earth, but his eternal rest didn't last that long. After a few centuries, he suddenly heard the sounds of a battle and the screams of the soldiers fighting the Wild Hunt, but he wasn't really concerned about it, just a little bit bothered. That is until one of the dying soldiers pronounced an ancient prayer and tried to draw on his gravestone a Fey symbol, hoping that an ancient spirit would come to their aid. At that point, Kyryll couldn't ignore the situation anymore. He woke up and vanquished the Wild Hunt, saving a few soldiers as a consequence. Kyryll then buried the dead soldiers on that island, which then became known as the Final Night Cemetery, where he kept on living on his own as the Ratnik Flins, in order to watch over the graves and prevent the Wild Hunt from possessing the corpses of his now fellow Ratniki. Today, Flins is trying to pass off as a regular human, and when his moonwheel suddenly appeared in his showroom, all he cared about was the fact that he could have used it to justify and conceal his Fey powers, since he doesn't actually need a moonwheel at all. The only one who knows is a former Fey noble is Nikita, the current Starshina, who brings him food to keep up appearances since he also doesn't need to eat or drink, and for the same reason I suppose he also doesn't need to breathe. This makes me think that the real Flins is just a flame inside the lantern, so the human-like Flins we interact with might actually be the body he had discarded, a corpse that he's possessing, much like the Wild Hunt does. We need Hu Tao in nod-krai right now, she would know for sure. There are two interesting things from Flins' story that we need to talk about. When Flins began his slumber, he thought that if he never came back to the mortal realm and just kept sleeping forever, he would have achieved eternity, which apparently is something the Fae have always yearned for. But what does it mean? Well, the Fae were created by the people of Hyperborea when Koitar, the first angel, gave them the authority of creation, which is most likely the heart of Tiberius, and the goal was to create a being that could merge with the world itself. As such, the Fae are higher beings from the start. They have a long lifespan. Flins is more than 500 years old, for example. But in Teyvat, long-lived species, the gods included, are not truly eternal, they're just immortal. Which means that if nothing happens to them, they can live for millennia like Zhongli, who's around 6000 years old, but if you live too long, you'll eventually suffer from erosion. This means that the Fae probably weren't jealous of the gods of the human realm, but of a different kind of being that is truly eternal. Another kind of gods that existed way before the current ones were created, and that are closely related to the angels who might actually be true Eternals. I'm of course talking about the moon goddesses, and the reason why I think that was their goal is simply because the same authority of creation was also used for the Sacred Air project, which millennia later and through a different process did cause the birth of the Moon Maiden, Columbina. I think the Fae were the first attempt at recreating an Eternal, but it kinda failed. You know, something like Rhindotter's early creations compared to Albedo, or even Scaramouche compared to the Raiden Shogun. The second interesting but problematic thing has to do with Flins' reawakening. Long Night's Oath tells the story of Aratnik, a descendant of the original Lightkeepers who, before succumbing to the Wild Hunt, prayed to a forgotten ancient entity, causing the sudden appearance of a blue flame that vanquished the abyss. This blue flame is obviously Flins, so the Ratnik is the one who drew that symbol on his gravestone. But considering that we obtained 3 pieces of this artifact set from the Tight Seal stones in the quest The Bell of Morning Echoes, and the pieces awakened Sigurd, it means that he was the Ratnik from Flins' story. The only problem is that the Ratnik from Long Night's Oath kept walking into the darkness as basically a walking dead, while the one in Flins' story seems to have died on his gravestone. But above all, the Ratniki who died in that battle were all buried in the Final Night Cemetery. So why is Sigurd's grave east of Lempo Isle, especially considering that his body had never been found, so his grave could have been erected literally everywhere they wanted. Now, through Flins' story and his weapon, we can try to figure out what the situation in Snezhnaya with the Tsar and the Tsaritsa is. Since the Tsar was the ruler of the Fae, it makes me think that he was a Fae himself, which isn't exactly impossible because the Archons don't have to be manifestations of their elements like Venti, Zhongli, and A. They can also be other kinds of beings. Rukkhadevata and Nahida are avatars of Irminsul, Egeria was a shade-made water dragon sovereign, Fossolor was an Oceanid, and of course Mawika is a human, so a Fae Archon is completely feasible. Now, the Tsar's followers, like Flins, were defined as blue flames, but when the Tsaritsa took over, they fell one by one and were replaced by red ones, which makes me think that the Tsaritsa may also be a Fae and that she either drove away or even executed those who opposed her, which sounds like what we expected Fontaine to be, considering how many times we've heard Rhodeia being paranoid expecting Fossolor to send assassins after her when she actually couldn't care less. Anyway, we were told that the Fae and the humans don't coexist anymore, but we also know that the Fae are still somewhat important, but not as much as in the past, which makes me think even more that Pulcinella is indeed a former Fae noble who became the mayor in order to retain his political influence over the nation. To make things even more complicated, how did the Tsar die? Of course, he could have been a casualty of the Cataclysm like Makoto and Nigeria, but there's a very interesting legend going around in Snezhnaya, according to which there were once two brothers, the younger King of Summer Oak and the elder King of Winter Holly. These brothers were said to love each other dearly, but one day they had a pretty big fight and the elder accidentally slew the younger, and since then the world has been ruled by an unrelenting winter. Of course, we know that the winter in Snezhnaya has existed since before the Belly Tsar, but legends are always based on a truth that has been exaggerated over time, and if we consider that the Tsar was apparently forever shrouded in wind and snow, then maybe he actually used to have a brother, and that opens up the possibility that the Tsaritsa was related to this King of Summer Oak. She could have been his wife or daughter, so the Tsar's death might have been an act of vengeance, a coup d'etat. That being said, the Tsar is a very interesting character in the story because I honestly can't figure out if he was good or evil or both. We learned that he went on an expedition to the far north, which is usually how Hyperborea is defined, but when he came back he had changed. He stood silently on his throne of the Pale Star and turned away the humans. Then all of a sudden he decided to build a labyrinthine? I honestly couldn't figure out which one is the right pronunciation, to be honest. Anyway, a labyrinthine palace at the edge of the frozen earth alongside the giant furnaces of Snezhnaya, where he invited the West's Fae and humans to work on a secret project, the Tsar's grand delusion, but also an audacious transgression. We also know that he sent Rotwang to nod-krai to uncover and retrieve a secret power that would have allowed him to unify the entirety of Teyvat under his rule, something not even the Heavenly Principles had ever been able to, but also something that reinforces my idea that the Cryo-Archon's ideal is peace and not love, which can also be explained with a new theory I have about the nations being pairs of opposites that I'm showing on the screen right now, but we're gonna talk about this in a future video because I already know by experience what inevitably happens in the comment section when this topic comes up. Now, among the people who worked on this project, there were two brothers. The elder brother inherited the family name and was tasked to guard the sacred chariot, while the younger one had to give up on his family name and went to the frontiers to live in obscurity. Up until now, the chariot has been used to define the sun, and considering the Tsar most likely found out something in Hyperborea that left him speechless, we might think that just as there were moon goddesses, there might have been a sun god, and the Tsar was trying to create a new sun that worked for him. This could make sense for two reasons. Either the Tsar wanted to break free from the eternal winter of Snezhnaya, so the reason why he sent the pioneers to develop nod-krai was to move there with his people, or Snezhnaya simply doesn't have a sun at all. You see, a lot of people believe that nod-krai is a region that the devs suddenly came up with out of nowhere just to extend the game, but in reality it was always meant to exist, and we've actually known about it since version 1.0. Nod-krai is the Moonlight Forest from the Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies. In that book, the Night Mother is obviously the Tsaritsa, but what's interesting is that the faraway land of night that she rules over, Snezhnaya, is a place without light, save for the occasional ray of moonlight, which means that the Tsar may have actually tried to create a sun in order to bring some light and maybe some warmth to this frozen land. Anyway, when the Cataclysm happened, the elder brother was consumed by quote-unquote beasts for the crime of glimpsing the secret of the philosopher, and when the younger brother came back and found out what had happened, he left for the Borderlands, so nod-krai, on a quest for vengeance. It should be clear by now that the younger brother was Solovey, the founder of the Lightkeepers, the first torchbearer, so I suppose that he had lost the pure innocence Ayla saw in him and that she wanted to protect. What happened to his elder brother though makes me think that the Tsar's transgression was potentially similar to Deshret's, and the secret of the philosopher might be somehow related to alchemy, so the philosopher's stone, which surprisingly aligns with one of my old theories in which I associated every Fatui Harbinger with the 12 alchemical stages that lead to the creation of the philosopher's stone, the magnum opus, meaning that both archons might be trying to achieve a similar goal. Was the Tsar actually trying to recreate a higher being just like the people of Hyperborea? And is the Tsaritsa using the same methods and research to bring back the third Ascender? In the end, all we can do for now is wait for more Fae to enter the story and learn from them the secret transgressions of the Cryo Archons and their relentless rebellion against the Heavenly Principles. And that's it, I hope you liked the video. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, and if you're interested in Genshin Impact Theory videos, consider subscribing. I suppose my next video will be about the Luna 2 livestream, but in the meantime you'll be able to witness in the community tab my adventure to turn Manato into the S-rank agent he was supposed to be. I think that'll be fun. Well then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, over and out.